for the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael and for Yidden all over, that they should be protected. They should be protected from all harm. My wife has a chavrusa, a partner's tour chavrusa, a woman who lives in Israel, and they're in the shelters. They practically are not leaving the shelters. So Hashem should hope that they should all be safe and sound, and Haman and his whole Chadgaja should be eliminated.
Amen.
Amen. Okay, gewaltig. So we are right at the top of Mem Tes Amud Aleph.
The daf is unclear. Can you sharpen that a bit?
Is it better now?
Either that or my eyes are. Yeah, now it's better.
It was a little.
My eyes are the.
Oh, could be your eyes.
Yeah, it's focused better. There we go. That's better.
Okay. Zog the Heilige Gemara. Tani Rabba Bar Chana Kameda Rav. Rabba Bar Chana quoted a brayso in front of Rav. Kivse Atzeres Shachton L'Shum Elam. So you're shachting the Kivse Atzeres, and you have in mind for Elam. Now the Mefarshim say it doesn't just mean Elam; it means Elam, which are oilais. So it's a Shlomim L'Shem Oila, which is like a carbon that you shechted Shalai L'Shema. So the halach is, like we learned in the first Mishnah in Maseches Zachim, Kisherin, it's a kosher carbon, but V'lo Alu L'Baylam L'Shum Chayva. So you can be makir the animal as an oila, no problem, but you're going to have to bring new kivsei atzeres. Amalei Rav, no, Alu V'Alu, Shnaimel, they're good. And in fact, they're if you had in mind an oila, while you're shechting the kivsei atzeres, you're going to be mekayim the mitzvah of the shnei kvasim. It'll be kosher. However, that statement of Rav needs to be qualified. The Amar Rab Chisda, Mistavra Milsa de Rav, B'chesover Elam. For some reason, the person shechting it thought they were Elam and not kvasim. Now, let's not forget, Elam and kvasim are the same species. The question is age. Once it crosses the age of 2 years, they're called Elam. So it's not like totally wild that someone would make that mistake. I could make a mistake between an ayil and a hippopotamus because I don't know my animals well. And kvasim could also be males. It could be male or female. I understand. Okay. But whatever the case is, Amar Rav Chisda Mistavra Milsa de Rav B'chesover Elam. He thought they were Elam. V'shachton l'shum kvasim. And he had in mind for kvasim. Sharei kvasim l'shum kvasim nishchatu. He didn't do anything wrong. He thought it was an ayil, but it was really a keves, but he shechted it l'shem keves. So there's no issue over here. Aval kisover elim. But if he thought they were elim, v'shachton l'shum elim, so he thought it was an ayil, and he thought it was an oila, and he shechted this shlomim l'shem oila, loy. That's not going to be good. That's not where Rav said alu v'alu, because that's an akir batos. Why is it an akir batos? Because he didn't want to divert it. He thought he was shechting a different animal. He misinterpreted what this animal was, and therefore it's an akir batos, but avakira. It doesn't make a difference if it was by mistake. The fact of the matter is he had in mind for an ayla oila, not for a keves shlomim. And therefore, even though this was mistaken, it wasn't a deliberate attempt to ruin the carbon, nevertheless, it still ruins the carbon. The Rabba Amar, but the Rabba says, Akir b'tos lo have akira. If he has in mind for an oila, because he made a mistake, that wouldn't be considered an akira. So that's a very big chiddush, that making a mistake of a shaloi lishma is not shaloi lishma. It's only shaloi l'shma if you did it shaloi l'shma on purpose. So Amar Rava, or there are those who are garish, Amar Rabba, umusvina nashmaitzen. We're going to ask a kash on this yisoid. It's a mechudesh dika yisoid, that if you made a mistake, an unintentional mistake, and because of that it was shaloi l'shma, that's not a problem of shaloi l'shma. A huge chiddush. And now we're going to ask kashas on this huge chiddush. This is a question that came up many, many times in the Maseches Zachim. is the kohen liable for damages if he is mefagel your carbon? So it says in the Brisa, black and white, hakohanim shepiglu b'mikdash mizidin chayovin. So right off the bat, this answers a question we asked many times. As Rashi says, what are they going to be chayiv? They're going to be chayiv l'shalim l'baylim to make carbon. They have to pay damages. So that answers our question that we asked many times. A kohen who's mefagel, he does it on purpose. He's a mazik, and he has to pay full value of the animal to the owner of the animal.
Why would anybody want to do this on purpose in the Kodesh? That doesn't make sense that a coin.
Why would somebody want to shoot his own people? I mean, people do cuckoo things. Obviously, this kohen was angry at the person bringing the carbon, and he wanted to teach him a lesson.
So this is a huge chiddush that a pigel is only if you do it on purpose. That it was just a mistake.
That's exactly what the Gemara is. That's exactly the point that the Gemara is going to prove, that even if it's done by mistake, it's going to be a pigel. That's going to be the kasha. Because Rabba's chiddush, that a diversion that's done by mistake is not a diversion. That's going to be a big problem. That's exactly what we're checking now. So if they did it b'shoigig, the carbon is still possible, but they're not liable for damages. And we learned a brisa to clarify and qualify the brisa that we just quoted, or the mishnah that we just quoted, that pigul on pigul, even if they did it unintentional, it was a mistake, the pigul would still be a pigul, it's just that they're not liable to pay for damages. So hey chidami, let's understand, what does it mean they did pigul b'shoigig? Ilema de yada de chatasi, if the kohen shechting the animal knew that it was a chatos, but he had in mind l'shum shlomim, meaning he had in mind to eat it, not for one day and one night, which is the allowed time to eat a carbon chatos, but rather he had in mind to eat it chutz l'zmanoi, which would have been on the second day, like a shlomim. Hai shoygigin mizidin havu. That's not a shoygig. If he knowingly has kavanah when he's shachting a chatos that he should eat it chutz l'zmanoi, that's mazid. So what is the example of shoygig, that the kohen is not liable for damages, but it's still a possible carbon of pigul? Elo, the case must be, elolav, the chasover shlomahu. When the kohen shechted this animal, he thought it, in fact, it was a carbon shlomim. And therefore, the kamachashiv bala shum shlomim. That's why he had in mind to eat it tomorrow. And it turned out he made a mistake. It was really a chatos. That's exactly the shaila of Rabbah, where Rabbah said, akira v'tois lehav akira. Yet the Brisa here says v'katani pikul and pigul. So you see clearly, alma akira b'tos have akira, which is exactly what David just said, right? It's not logical to say that just because I didn't realize what I was doing, that's not an akira. It's still a full-blown machshavas pigul. It was a chatos, and you had in mind for a shlama, meaning you had in mind to eat it. It doesn't make a difference if you thought that was the right thing. The fact of the matter is, you had a machshava chutz mana and it's pigul. So it's a raya against Rabbah who says akira betos loy have akira. Amalei Abaye, you don't have a raya. Maybe the case of the brisa that says pigul and pigul by shoygig means the yoda the chatos v'kam chashiv bal l'shum shlomim. He knows it's a chatos and he bedav kind of mind l'shum shlomim. You're going to ask me a question that's mazid, it's not shoygig? No, I'll tell you what the shoygig was. Uva mutter, right? We know there's two types of shoygig. Either you didn't know it's Shabbos, or you didn't know that this is also on Shabbos. So maybe the shoygig is the kohen didn't know that it's also to have a machshavas pigul. That's why it's shoygig, and that's where he's potter. But avada, it's where he knowingly changed the zman achila. But if he did it by mistake, will maintain Rabba Shita that if he does it betos, it's not considered akira. So Rabbi is not out of the dark yet, because we still have more kashas on him. Again, it's a very mechudish svara that if you have a kavan of shalol shmork or a kavan of pigul due to a mistake, that wouldn't be considered an akira. Masav Rab Zera, Rab Shimon Oimer, Rab Shimon said, Kol Menachos shenikmetu shalol shmon. This is a very famous Rab Shimon that we had. Any mincha that the kmitah was done shaloi l'shman, ksheras will be kosher, v'alu l'baylo mishum chayva. Unlike karbanos that were shechted shaloi l'shma, or the zrika was done shaloi l'shema, we say that the carbon is kosher, but loy olu l'baylam l'shem chayva. By a mincha, there's no such thing as shaloi l'shema as loy olu l'baylam. It's olu l'baylam l'shem chayva. Why? Because the mistake is not the diversion can't be a mistake. She'eina menachos doimis l'zvachim. Menachos are not like zvachim where there could have been a mistake done inadvertently. If you're making kmitza on a minchas machvas and you have in mind that you're making the kmitza l'shem a minchas marcheshes, you see what you're working on while you're doing the kmitza. It's obvious that it's a minchas machvas, so you can't be making a mistake like that. While he's doing the kmitza, he could say I have kavanah l'shomar cheshes, but it's obvious to him that he's working on a minchas machvas. Or chareva l'shom belula, if he is presenting a minchas chareva like a minchas choyte which does not have oil, and he has in mind that he's doing a minchas soilas that has oil. Again, he knows that that's not a right machshava. He could see there's no oil in this mincha that he's being makriv. Ma'aseh mechichin alei sheichareva, but bezvacham enekain. Because when you shecht an animal, you have no idea what this animal is being brought for, because the same animal might be the right animal for many different karbanas. Aber shchita aber bezvacham enekain shchita achas l'chulon. Kabbalah achas l'chulon, zrika achas l'chulon. So you can have a legit machshava of shaloi l'shma by a zevach, but you cannot have a legit machshava of shaloi l'shma by a mincha, because it's obvious in the avodah that you're doing what it is that you're doing. Zogt Gemara, let's understand this a little bit more clearly. Hey chidami, by the mincha. He knows it's a minchas machvas because he sees what he's working on. And he has specific kavana. It's a crazy kavana. I know it's a machvas, but I don't care. I'm having kavana l'shem marcheshes. Ki ma'aseh muchichen ma'have. Why do we say that this is not considered shaloi l'shema? Because ma'aseh muchichen, he knows he's making a mistake. Yes, he knows he's making a mistake. But he is specifically and explicitly stating, I want to ruin this mincha. I want to have in mind for a minchas marcheshes, even though I know that it's a minchas machvas. Why wouldn't that possible? It should be possible. So what is the case where Reb Shimon says that the machshava of shaloi l'shma by a mincha would not possible? Elolav, the chesavar marcheshesi, it's really a machvas, but he mistakenly thought for some reason that it was a marcheshes. Vika kametz law mishum marcheshes, and that's why he was komet to l'shum marcheshes, because he thought it was a marcheshes. I don't know why he wasn't able to recognize that it wasn't. Vita, and it was a mistake. The hacha who the ma'aseh muchichan olah davka by a mincha, where if he made a mistake, since ma'aseh muchichan that it's really a machvas, that is not a psul of shaloi l'shma. Haba alma, but by a zavach, we say that akira betos have akira. But by a zavach, if I had a kavanah for a shlomim, because I thought it was a shlomim, that would be a good akira, and that would passel the carbon with a shaloi l'shma. So once again, it's a kash on Rabbah who says that an akira betos is not an akira. Amar le Abaye, no way. Lo olam di yada de machvasi. Let's say that the case of the mincha where Rab Shimon is saying that it's not a machshava of shaloi l'shma is even if you knowingly divert, meaning you know it's a machvas, yet you say I'm having kavanah on this machvas l'shem marcheshes. Even there, it's not considered a machshava of shaloi l'shma. The question is, if I'm purposely diverting it, why isn't that not shaloi l'shma? At the end of the day, even if it's ma'asav machichin, but I'm specifically stating I want to do this machvas l'shem marcheshes. Why wouldn't that not be shaloi l'shma? Why wouldn't that be shaloi l'shma? The teretz is Rabbi l'taimei the Amar Rava machshava de lo minkara pasal rechmana. An illegitimate machshava that it's not clear on its face that it's a pasal machshava. That's where the Torah apostles as shaloi l'shma. So if I'm doing the shechita of a shalom l'shem oila, it's not obvious from my machshava, from my expression, machshava always means you articulated it. It's not obvious from my machshava that it's possible, because we can't tell by looking at this scenario what this carbon actually is. But machshava de minkara, if it's obvious to everybody around that this is a machvas, not a marcheshes, even though I explicitly state I want it to be l'shem marcheshes, le'posel rachmana, that's a disqualified machshava, not because he didn't have a conscious interest in diverting and bedavka making it shalom l'shma, and it's not a mistake. No, it's because the Torah invalidates such a machshava, and therefore there is no psul of shalom l'shma by a mincha, which is what Reb Shimon's time is. But a machshava shalom l'shma, even if it's bedavka by a carbon where on its face you can't tell that it's a wrong machshava, because just looking at someone shechting an animal, you don't know what the carbon is for. That is considered a valid shalom l'shma, and only that will the Torah passel. So at the end of the day, the chiddush of Rabbah remains standing, that he holds a mistake is not considered a machshava of shalom l'shma. A mistake is not considered a machshava of pigul. Sagt Gemara weiter. Hatamidin ein ma'akvin es hamusafin. If you didn't bring the carbon tamid on a day where there's a carbon musaf, that doesn't mean your carbon musaf would be possible. It would not be possible. And if you weren't makriv the musaf, your carbon tamid for that day will still be kosher. Musafin and ma'akiv that could mean is that sometimes there's multiple carbonates of musaf brought in one day. Each one stands for itself, and even if you can't bring the whole set, the individual carbon of musaf that you brought will be valid. Now, what happens if Eloi hikrivu keves baboiker? What if they did not makriv the tamid shel shachris? Nevertheless, yakrivu bein harabayim. They should still be makriv the tamid shel bein harabayim. That sounds to me like the carbon tamid of the shachris is not ma'akiv the carbon tamid of bein harabayim. Okay. Amar Rab Shimon, Emasai, when do we say this? That's Bizman Shahayu Anusa Moishagin. If you didn't bring the carbon tamid of Shachris, you could still bring the tamid of Ben Abayim if the carbon of Shachris wasn't brought due to either an onions or a shogig. But if they bemazed did not fulfill the mitzvah of carbon tamid of Shachris, then they lost their schus for the afternoon as well. Lo yakrivu bein harabayim. So they are somewhat linked, meaning if b'mezid they didn't bring it, they wouldn't be able to bring the tamid shel bein harabayim. What about hektoris? What about lo hiktiru hektoris b'boiker? Because we know the halacha by hektoris is that half of the portion is brought in the morning and half of the portion is brought in the afternoon. What if they didn't do the morning hektoris? Then yaktiru bein harabayim. The Tanakhama says you're still maktir bein harabayim. Amar Rab Shimon, if you do that, v'chula hoisa kroiva bein harabayim. They didn't only bring the portion for the afternoon, rather they also brought the entire portion that was supposed to have been brought in the morning. They are makriv it all together, so the full portion for that day will still be brought on the mizbeach. Why? She'ein mechanchen es mizbeach hazav el b'ktoris asamim. When you're mechanech, when you want to sort of start up the mizbeach has azov, you have to do it with a full measure. Rashi says, what does this have to do with anything? And you cannot start off the mizbeach ha'oila for the day, meaning the mizbeach outside. Ela b'tamid shel shachar. You need the tamid shel shachar there. And you can't prime the shulchan for the day. Ela b'lechem aponim. B'Shabbos, the lechem aponim on Shabbos. So the end of the Mishnah will require a lot of explanation, which we will get to in the Gemara, not today. What if a tzibur does not have enough animals to fulfill the mitzvah of tamid and the mitzvah of musaf? What takes precedence? Do you dedicate the minimal resources that you have to the tamid, or do you dedicate the minimal resources that you have to the musaf? What exactly is this scenario? Ilema tamidin diyoymei, Talmud of today, umusaf diyoymei. So let's say we're talking on Shabbos, we're talking on Rosh Chodesh, and you either have enough animals to bring the Talmud of today or the Musaf of today. Pshita, that's not a shaila to ask. Pshita tamidim adifi. The tamidim are adif. Why? The havalu tadir umukudish. Now there's two lashonis in Rashi how to understand tadir umukudish. Either tadir is the tamid, and Mekudesh is the Musaf because it comes on a day like Shabbos, on a day like Rosh Chodesh over Chayil, and therefore Tadr Umekudesh, Tadr Kodim. But Rashi has another pshat. That Tadr Mekudesh, the Tamid is Tadr and Mekudesh. Mekudesh means it's already Kodesh, meaning its Chiv to be brought has already been triggered. The Chiv to bring the Tamid was triggered even before the Chiv to bring the Musaf. The Musaf isn't triggered till later in the day. The Tamid, the chiyuv to bring the Talmud is triggered right away in the morning. So Tadr Umakudish. The Talmud has two milas. Sai it's Tadr, and Sai it's Kedusha, it's chiyuv to bring was triggered first. Ella, so that can't be the Shaila, because surely you bring the Talmud. So the question that Reb Chia must be asking is about a different scenario. Ella Tamidim de Machar Umusafim Da'idna. You have a carbon musaf today, but you don't yet have your carbon prepared for tomorrow morning for the Talmud. So should we fulfill the mitzvah that's here right now to be makav our carbon musaf, or maybe we should rather forego the carbon musaf, but save this animal for tomorrow morning, so we'll have it for the carbon Talmud. Zok to Gemara, this is the shaila. Do you say tamidim adifi, even tomorrow's Talmud takes precedence to today's musaf, shekain tadir, because it's tadir, it's something that comes every day. Dilma musaf nadifi the havalu mekudesh. Either Mekudesh means because it's from a day of Yom Tiv, or the Havalim Mekudesh, its Chiv has already been triggered now, versus the carbon Talmud of tomorrow, whose Chiv will not be triggered until tomorrow. That was the Shaila that Reb Chia Ba'avin asked Reb Chisda. So Reb Chisda responded, Amalei Tinitua, we actually have a Mishnah that will clarify your suffix. Because it says in our Mishnah, Hatamidin ein ma'akvin es hamusafin, v'loy hamusafin ma'akvin es hatamidin, so let's understand with clarity what is the exact scenario that our Mishnah is referring to. Hey Chidami, ilemo de islay ulakadem. If the discussion is what comes first, when we say that the tamidim are not makav the musafin, it means that if you have all your kabbanis, and you were not following the correct order, and you were makav the carbon musa first before the Talmud, that would be kosher. If that's what you want to claim the Mishnah means, that's simply not true. But Tanya, we learned, how do you know that you're not allowed to bring any carbon before the Talmud Shel Shachar? The ha'oila, ha'oila rishayna. The oila rishayna of the day has to be the carbon Talmud. So the Mishnah couldn't possibly mean when it says tamidim ein ma'akvin es musafin that you could bring the musaf first, because it's clear you cannot bring the musaf first. Now, if you look at the bottom Tosfos, there's a very, very long Tosfos that runs half of our Amud Aleph, the full Amud Beis, and the next Amud Aleph. And the Tosfos is discussing what is the makar, where do we know from that the Talmud must be the first carbon of the day. Although we quoted here in the Gemara Rav Shita of Oila Rishayna, there are other places in Shas where other sources for this halacha are found. So Zog to Gemara, that cannot be what our Mishnah is talking about, is what your makriv first and what your makriv second, because everybody holds you for sure are going to be makriv the carbon Talmud first. So what does our Mishnah mean when our Mishnah says that the carbon Talmud is not ma'akiv the carbon musaf? Ela pshita, you know what the Mishnah must be referring to? The leslay. We didn't have enough karbonis, and the question is, which one should we do? Should we do the musaf or should we do the Talmud? Now, we just had a discussion about this, so we're going to review our discussion. If the discussion in the Mishnah is that if you have a choice between bringing today the Musaf and today the Talmud, and the Mishnah is saying you could do whichever one you want, because one's not makav the other, that's not true. We have already concluded, Amai, Tadr Umu Kudish, Tadar Adif. And that's according to one Lashon Rashi, you would be Garish Tadar Adif. We know for sure the Talmud comes first. So it can't be, the Mishnah can't be a case where we have one animal and the discussion is whether or not you should use it for the Talmud or for the Musaf. And the Mishnah is concluding either one is good, because that's not true. We know you have to bring the Talmud first. So the Mishnah must be speaking about the case of our Shaila. Elalav, the Lamacher. We have a Talmud, we have a choice of using this one animal for the Musaf of today or for the Talmud of tomorrow. Vikatani, and our Mishnah Paskins, a makvin zeh alma kiadadininu. So you have a riot to the Zokter Bechista, I have a riot to your Shaila. If I had one animal and I didn't know, should I use it for today's Musaf or for tomorrow's Talmud, you can do whatever you want, because our Mishnah says one is not ma'akav the other. Amar le'abaya, you don't have a riot from our Mishnah to the Shaila of Reb Chia bar Abba, I think it was, or Reb Chia bar Avin. You don't have a raya. You know why? La'olam de islahu ulakadim. Maybe our Mishnah is speaking about where you had all the animals you need, and the discussion is just which one comes first. And our Mishnah is saying you could bring the Musaf before the Talmud. We just said that's not an option. The kakashaloch shaloye davar kodim. You're not allowed to bring any carbon before the Talmud shel shachar. So how could the Mishnah say either one can be brought first? Maybe with Rava brought a right from Ha'olah that you have to bring the Talmud first. That's mitzvah ba'alma. But b'diavad, if you brought the Musa first, look, the Mishnah would be kosher anyway. So therefore, you don't have a raya to Reb Chia bar Avin Shaila. So Tashma, let's see if we could find another raya to the Shaila of Reb Chia bar Avin, and that is if you only have one animal and you're not sure, should I use it for today's Musaf or should I save it for tomorrow's Talmud? What should I do? Tashma. The halacha is in poichsin mishisha tloyim hamevukarin belichkas atloyim kidei l'shabbos u'lishnei yomim tovim so Rosh Hashanah. You always have to have 6 tamidim that are prepared and ready to go when you have a 3-day Yom Tov. When did they ever have a 3-day Yom Tov in Eretz Yisrael by the Beis Hamikdash? Only on Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah is 2 days even in Eretz Yisrael. So if Rosh Hashanah either precedes Shabbos, so it's Thursday and Friday, or Rosh Hashanah is after Shabbos, it's Sunday and Monday, then you're going to have a 3-day Yom Tov in which you cannot gather animals. So you'd have to prepare in advance 6 animals so you'll have enough for your Tamidin for the 3 days. Hey Chidami, what exactly was the scenario that this Mishnah is discussing? Ein poichsin mishisha taloyim. Ilema the Islay Tamidim Umusafim the Islay Tamidim Umusafim, if you have plenty of animals available, it's not an issue of capacity. Well, then tuva have it. It's not 6. 6 are just for the Tamidim. But if you need to prepare all of the animals of Musafin, which Rashi says adds an additional 16 animals. So then before Yom Tov, it's not enough to prepare 6 animals. You'd have to prepare 22 animals. So you have the inventory that you need to process all the karbonas throughout the 3-day Yom Tov. Ella, what must be is you only had 6 animals. Ella lav the lastly. You didn't have 6 animals. You didn't have 22 animals. You only had 6 animals. And what do? What did the Mishnah say here? What do you do with these 6 animals? You prepare them for the carbon Talmud. Maybe use it for a musaf. Tamidin adifi. Even the Talmud of the 2nd day and the 3rd day of Yom Tov comes before the musaf of the 1st day Yom Tov, because you're using all 6 only for Tamidim. On the 1st day, you might say, hey, I have 6 animals, let me use 2 for the Talmud, and let me use whatever I need for the musaf, and then I don't have it tomorrow. But here it says, no, you got to save them. You have to save the karbonos, so you should have Talmud for today and for tomorrow and for the day after. So you have a raya that Tamidim adifi. Again, a raya to the shaila that the Chia bar Avin asked. Dr. Merlo, you don't have a raya from there. La'olam de islay. We're talking about where there's plenty of animals. Why would the Mishnah say you only have to prepare 6? You got to prepare 22. V'hachi ka'amar ein poichsen mishisha tloyim hamevukorim belishkas atloyim dal yoimim koidim shchita. You need, for the Talmud, you need something more than for a regular carbon. For any other carbon, you have to check the animal to make sure it doesn't have a mum. But the carbon Talmud required a much more vigorous scrutiny. And the carbon Talmud, you had to be boidik for a period of 4 days. So the preparation of an animal for the carbon tamid is much more vigorous because you had to have had it contained for 4 days, where you could be boidik it for 4 days. Or there's a shayla if you're boidik it the first day and the last day, if you're boidik every day, but you have to have 4 days of quarantine on it. So it's only those karbonis that the Bryce is discussing in poischin mishisha tloim, because you have to have 6 tloim that you already were boidik for 4 days. But avada, you need other animals as well. But we're not discussing that. We're just focusing on the special requirement for the carbon tamid. Umani ben bagbaki. You know who it's going according to? It's going according to Ben Bagbag, because Ben Bagbag is the one who was machadish this extra level of scrutiny that a carbon tamid needs 4 days of scrutiny. The Tanya ben Bagbag Omer, Minayin l'tamid shaton bikur dalad yomim kodim shchita. How do you know dafka about a carbon tamid? You need this extra scrutiny of 4 days. Talmud loymar tishmur l'akav li b'mayadoi is what we say every day in karbonis, referencing the carbon tamid. And by the carbon pesach it says, you have to take the animal on the 10th day, tie it up by your bed until the 14th day, and you have to check your carbon pesach for 4 days. The Torah is comparing the carbon tamid to the carbon pesach. It needs inspection 4 days. So once again, you don't have a raya from the Bryce of 6. That you have to have 6 animals prepared, that the Talmud takes precedence over the Musaf. To the contrary, the Musaf is there and it's available. We're just discussing the special needs of the Talmud, that they have to be under scrutiny for 4 days. If that's the case, how could 6 be enough? Hani Shisha, Shiva Havu, Ika de Tzafra de Tlasa B'Shabbata. And there's another Gersh who holds the Tzafra de Chada B'Shabbata. And it depends on what day Rosh Hashanah fell out on. If Rosh Hashanah fell out on Sunday and Monday, then the problem is if you only prepare 6 animals, Tuesday morning you're not going to have a carbon tamid. Because how are you going to find the carbon tamid Motzei Shabbos, Motzei Yom Tov? Or on the flip side, if Rosh Hashanah was Thursday, Friday, and then Shabbos, Motzei Shabbos, how are you going to find an animal for tomorrow morning? So you should really need 7. So you really need to keep a 7th to prepare for the tamid of the next morning, because Motzei Yom Tov or Motzei Shabbos, you're not going to be able to find an animal. Correct, Gemara. That's not a kasha. If you're telling me you got to worry, if you're saying we're addressing before and after, tamanya hava, because when are you preparing for Yom Tov? In the afternoon, before you brought the tamid shel bein harabayim. So then you should need 8, because you need an animal for the tamid shel bein harabayim of erev Yom Tov or of erev Shabbos. Tamanya hava, the ika de panya the malishapta. You would need an animal prepared for the tamid shel bein harabayim of while you're preparing for Yom Tov. You need this afternoon's carbon as well. Elamai halay kasha. You know why? The labasu dakav kamar. Avadi, you got to prepare for erev Yom Tov. But we're talking about the specific preparations for Yom Tov. You need 6 for Yom Tov. Avadi, you need 1 for this afternoon as well. But the Bryce is focusing on 6 because the Bryce is just focusing on those that are needed for the Yom Tov itself. Mikol Makam Shiva Havu. You still need to prepare 7, not 6. Ella, Zok to Gemara, we're not really, the Mishnah that we quoted, it says you need 6 for a day that you should have for Shabbos and Yom Tov. It doesn't mean on a day where you have a 3-day Yom Tov. It's talking about any day of the week. Any day of the week, you need to have 6, which happens to correspond to the amount of Tamidim that would be required for a Shabbos followed by a Yom Tov of 2 days. But it's not referring specifically to the preparations of a Yom Tov of 3 days. So Zok Gemara, Latana ba'almakai. The Maisa, the words of the Mishnah are Kidei l'Shabbos ubeis yamim tovim shal Rosh Hashanah. So it sounds very much like the Brisa is in fact talking specifically about preparing for a 3-day Yom Tov. Umay Kidei l'Shabbos ubeis yamim tovim shal Rosh Hashanah. It's simna ba'alma. It's just a way to remember. How do you know that you need to always have 6? The good way to remember it is because you need the amount of tamidim in inventory that you would require for a 3-day Yom Tov. but it doesn't literally mean that we're preparing for a 3-day Yom Tov. Because as we said, while you're preparing for a 3-day Yom Tov, you would actually need to put away 7 because you need for the day after Yom Tov for Isra Chag. And they konami. Actually, if you analyze carefully the actual wording of the Brisa, you'll see that I'm right. Because it doesn't say you have to prepare 6 for Shabbos and Yom Tov. It says Kedei l'Shabbos, enough for a Shabbos. Mashma, we're not talking about Shabbos. If we were literally talking about preparing for a 3-day Yom Tov, what the Brisa just said, you need 6 for Shabbos and for Yom Tov. Doesn't say that. It says you need enough that you would need for a Shabbos and for a Yom Tov. So clearly we're not talking about Shabbos and Yom Tov. We're just using Shabbos and Yom Tov as an example for us to remember 6. Kedei l'Shabbos, it says the Kedei l'Shabbos, v'loi Kedei l'Shabbos, u'lebeis Yom Tovim Shloshon Shmamina. So the question is, so then where does the number 6 come from? Up until the number 6 came from the inventory you need. Now you're saying every day you need to have 6. And we're just using today for Shabbos and Yom Tov to remind us about the number 6. Why do you need 6? What's wrong with 2? So Rashi says, maybe I have an answer to that. So if we look at Rashi, Rashi says, Kedei l'Shabbos u'lebeis Yomim, mashma simin, kloimer sheroy l'gimel Yomim. Where does Rashi say? Rashi specifically says, oh, here it is. V'loi pirish tamadover. The Gemara doesn't explain why you need 6. So Rashi v'li nira, the kavu chachamim minyan kavu l'dover. Why the chacham set up a number of 6 that you always have to have an inventory? The misrami mishgechi tloyim muvakurin zed dal yomim. If something went wrong and there was a sudden air raid siren where you couldn't go out and purchase things and you're locked down, you have to have provisions. So you should always have provisions available that will last you 3 days. So even if there's an interruption, you have a 3-day inventory to help you get through a tight spot. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we finished off Mem Tes, and tomorrow, Bez Hashem, we will learn Daf Nun. Shkoyach.